now it's time for Global Insight with our Oh Soo-young in the studio, who connects with experts around the world to get an in-depth analysis on major stories.
Thanks very much for the intro, Woo-hyun. Now it's time for Global Insight today, where we discuss the National Assembly's recent vote to open a regional branch of parliament in Sejong City, some 140 kilometers south of Seoul. The planned city was established 14 years ago, the brainchild of former President Roh Moo-hyun, who envisioned an administrative capital that would host the day-to-day workings of government and national politics. The decentralization idea, however, has been slow-moving and politically contentious, with the Constitutional Court declaring a move away from Seoul unconstitutional. And only a limited number of government ministries, cabinet bodies and other agencies moved to Sejong a decade ago. However, with soaring housing prices in the Seoul capital area and the National Assembly last week passing a bill to partially relocate by 2027, the decentralization plan appears to have gained traction again. So, can the city of Sejong become the Washington D.C. of South Korea? To answer this question, we have joining us today Hee-eun, Associate Dean and Professor of Law at Handong International Law School, and Wonhyuk, Senior Lecturer of Public Management at the Victoria University of Wellington. It's lovely to see you both this morning. Thank you very much for joining us. And
good morning.
Quite exciting plans for 2027 by the National Assembly. And starting with you, Professor Lee. Now, the Sejong relocation plan, it was first discussed 20 years ago, and the bill on the plan was actually introduced 5 years ago. So it's been a source of political debate, and it's been quite difficult to move things along. So why do lawmakers feel that this is the right time to take action on partially relocating the National Assembly to the city of Sejong?
Right. Well, yeah, as you mentioned before, there was this whole process has been slow moving, and there was great opposition initially to the plan by the opposition party. And as you mentioned earlier, also, there was the Constitutional Court made the ruling that it was unconstitutional to move the capital, since the Constitution declared that Seoul to be the capital city from basically early on in the Joseon Dynasty. But I think recently the dynamics have changed because, of course, there's a presidential election that's going to occur in March of next year. And so the opposition party has also moved along and been supportive of the sort of recent efforts to move the capital, at least significant portions of the government apparatus, to Sejong City. So I think what you're seeing is the confluence of a number of factors, but primarily the political dynamic of the presidential election. And I think the opposition party really wants to appeal to voters in the Chungcheong province areas.
And Professor Cho, after the vote passed last week, National Assembly Speaker Park Bong-seok, he said that the partial relocation is going to help raise national competitiveness for South Korea and also foster balanced regional development. Would you agree with that?
I generally support the idea of relocating the National Assembly to Sejong because it is just more efficient in that way. Central government workers can work more closely with the National Assembly branch in Sejong with some proximity without having to travel too much. But that's pretty much it. This relocation of National Assembly has almost nothing to do with national competitiveness or regionally balanced development, in my opinion. Decades of international research show that both national and regional competitiveness in general are driven by the capacity of industry to innovate. Of course, quality of government or well-functioning democracy are certainly important factors in national or regional development, but simply relocating the physical space of policy decision-making does not guarantee the success of the development project. The Administrative Capital City project in South Korea kick-started its implementation back in 2012 to 2014. So it has been almost 10 years, and nearly 300 government agencies left Seoul a long time ago. And look what has happened for the last 10 years. Seoul is dominating in terms of competitiveness and economic growth. For example, almost every single year since 2014, the regional GDP growth of Seoul has outperformed the rest of the country, including Busan, Daejeon, Daegu, Jeolla province, and Gyeongsang province. Professor Lee mentioned about Chungcheong province. Chungcheong province may be the only exception. But it is clear the relocation doesn't necessarily mean better regional economy. Again, the relocation of the National Assembly to Sejong can definitely improve the efficiency of the decision-making process. However, policymakers should be aware that this is not the holy grail of all the problems. Therefore, all kinds of realistic assessments and cautions need to be taken into account.
And Professor Cho, it looks like they need to do exactly just that, really, over the next few years, because they've agreed to relocate, but they haven't really pinned down the necessary details just yet. So how big do you think the Sejong branch needs to be? How should its functions be divided? And the most important question of all, who gets to stay in Seoul and who has to go?
That's a very difficult question, Soo-young. As far as I know, from government source documents and media reports, it seems that they are going to choose one of three different scenarios regarding who stays in Seoul and who goes to Sejong. Let's focus on the most likely scenario. That scenario is that around 10 to 12 standing committees and the Special Committee on Budget and Account, the National Assembly Secretariat, the Budget Office, and the National Assembly Research Service will go to Sejong. Again, this is just scenario one, and no one knows yet about what would actually happen, but it is the most likely scenario. Therefore, it seems that they could relocate at least 2/3 of the National Assembly's function, and this means the relocation of around 3,000 to 5,000 employees. About what should happen, not what's likely to happen, I have an unpopular opinion, which is that everyone could end up in Sejong. And the simple reason for this view is that it is just more cost efficient. The estimated cost of relocating the National Assembly is around $850 million. And you almost always end up spending more than the estimated cost in this kind of project. So if you're going to spend that much amount of taxpayers' money, why do you still want to keep certain functions in Seoul, which would only increase maintenance costs and travel expenses? I don't see the point of doing that.
I see, and while the ruling party certainly has been talking about expanding other branches of the state as well, and Professor Lee, all three branches of the state, they would, under the ruling party's plan, need to move to Sejong at some point in order to establish the city as an administrative capital. What do you think this transition is going to look like, and do you think it's possible?
Well, I think it was already mentioned by the professor that his suggestion, of course, moving everyone to Sejong is a potential situation. Unlikely, however, but I agree with him in terms of the efficiency aspect. Certainly a cost-saving measure to move everyone to Sejong. But I think the difficulty there, of course, is that you're talking about three branches of government, of course, and you have the National Assembly, of course, represents the legislature. You have the Cheongwade, of course, and the executive agencies like the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Justice, and then lastly, the judiciary. You have the Supreme Court as well as the Constitutional Court. And the question about moving these institutions down to Sejong, of course, is a huge decision, because when it comes, for example, to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, if you move them to Sejong, and including maybe the executive branch, Cheongwade too, the embassies will also have to move to Sejong to be closer to the ministry in terms of their consultations regarding Korea relations with other countries. Not to mention, of course, the Constitutional Court and the Supreme Court. You have law firms, lawyers that service those courts, as well as personnel, and all those offices, as well as related institutions, as well as businesses and other sectors will have to move to Sejong as well. So the effect of this, of course, is to not just move government agencies and government apparatuses, but also to move people down to Sejong that are related to those government agencies. And so while this may have the desired effect, of course, of what the administration wants in terms of balanced development, I agree with the sentiments earlier made by the professor that industry really needs to move, and businesses where productive capacities will be able to be increased. So this is really, I have mixed feelings about it in relationship to this idea of development, but certainly in terms of moving the capital itself, it can be done. It'll be expensive, but it will take a complex transition.
And Professor Cho, you did slightly mention your thoughts on the cost efficiency of the move to Sejong, but while the proponents of the move, they've cited time travel and expenses of going back and forth that end up costing the taxpayer as all the more reason to partially relocate to Sejong. But if efficiency and saving money is the objective, then why not simply invest in better video conferencing facilities, for instance, in this period of Zoom meetings? Do you think the partial relocation is going to reap sufficient benefits?
That is actually a great point, Soo-young. Thank you very much. So South Korea has excellent broadband infrastructure and top-level high-speed internet. So why not use it for video conferencing and virtual meetings? Yes, that sounds reasonable, but it is easier said than done. Because you also have to change workplace culture in government bureaucracy and strongly set up routines and practices in the National Assembly. South Korean government has of course tried it before, which is called smart work system. Again, back to the relocation project season 1 in 2012 and 2014. The whole relocation project cost more than 20 billion US dollars, and significant amount of that money was invested in building video conferencing facilities and cloud-based or web-based work routines. But this smart work system has been largely underused. Technologies like video conferencing or flex work centers are viewed as some kind of violation of Korea's traditional work values. A recent study shows that more than 80% of government employees report that the organizational culture is the biggest barrier in using video conferencing and remote work technology. Another issue is complexity of using the technology due to the security features. Security features are there for good reasons, especially for government sector, but it makes it more inconvenient to use. As a result, every single year, the government is spending around $20 million to pay for business trips within the country, often just to have a simple meeting that can be done online. That's a lot of money. But after the outbreak of COVID-19, we do see some changes. More people work remotely and more meetings are held online. But still, we are far from replacing face-to-face meetings entirely with video conferencing, and I think it will take quite a long time to change that.
And well, Professor Lee, it seems that the ruling party has been pushing for the relocation plan to go through, also in the last-ditch attempt to cool the skyrocketing housing prices in Seoul. But property prices have also been soaring in Sejong City. So do you think instead of really diffusing the situation in Seoul, do you think it's rather going to fan the flames in Sejong?
Right. Well, I think the difficulty there with the housing market, of course, is that you've had recent reports that the housing prices have soared actually in the last 6 months, and there's no sign of any cooling down. Now, this bubble will eventually burst at some point, but I think given the proclivities of the Korean consumer investors, whenever you see a new opportunity to invest, and particularly Sejong is prime for this, you're going to have people who are going to buy up housing, and with the thought of not necessarily living there, but of course seeing it as an investment opportunity. And I think this current administration has really had some difficulty dealing with the overall issue of housing generally. I think in terms of the housing market, you see now a lot of lower cost and medium cost housing now becoming much more expensive because of the overall shortage in the number of units that are available in the Seoul metropolitan area. But of course, because Sejong is a new city, housing keeps developing and new apartment buildings are being built. And so people see that, of course, as a prime opportunity to then invest. I think the current administration needs to, of course, get a better handle on this problem. Of course, this has been a problem that's plagued the Moon administration for quite some time. And I think the scandals over the years with respect to even government officials speculating on property, on inside information has not, of course, helped the problem. But this is, I think, an issue that is going to be long-term. I don't think this is like a question that's going to be developed or helped with Sejong or more housing being developed. I think it has to do with an overall attitude, of course, the Korean consumer investor with respect to how money is used and circulated within the economy. And so I'm not sure that the Sejong situation will help the situation. I think this housing crisis will continue for quite some time and really will be up to the next administration to put a better handle on housing and prices in general.
And well, the idea of creating an administrative city of its own, it's also been quite a challenge because, well, every weekend you see civil servants just flocking to the train station, just desperate to get away from the city and go back to Seoul for the weekend. And well, it's something like a scene from a war movie, an evacuation scene. And well, Professor Cho, what do you think needs to be done to make Sejong City more livable and a place that people want to stay rather than evacuate at the end of every work week?
Livability of Sejong is certainly an issue. Studies have shown that livable communities are places where people feel safe, healthy, and socially connected. Also, people want to live in places where it is clean, environmentally friendly, and where there is something to sit on and something to look at. A recent survey conducted last June shows that still more than 34% of relocated Korean public servants commute long distance every day because they don't like the city as a place to live. And if you are married with children, it is much more likely that you don't relocate your family to Sejong from Seoul. Studies have shown that long, unsafe, and inconvenient commutes have negative impacts on mental health as well as on productivity. In another recent survey, research found that people in Sejong think housing quality is actually good in Sejong. However, this study also found that transportation infrastructure is really bad and very inconvenient in Sejong. They also found cultural amenities are poor and medical services are not great in the city. On top of that, it is getting more and more expensive to live in Sejong. Professor Lee just mentioned about the housing bubbles and housing prices, not just in Sejong or Seoul, but maybe it will be even more expensive if this National Assembly relocation creates a bubbly real estate market in Sejong. So among these factors of livability here, there are things that you cannot really do much about, especially in the short run, but there are also things that you can design well to promote some of these important aspects of lifestyle, and that is, I think, the transportation.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. That was Hee-eun Lee, Associate Dean and Professor of Law at Handong International Law School, and Wonhyuk Cho, Senior Lecturer of Public Management at Victoria University of Wellington. Thank you both so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.